Hello, BookTube. This is Weekly Reads. I've had something of a downer week this week, and I'm not entirely sure what to make of the 2 books I read and 1 book that I bailed on over the course of this reading week. So let's get started because this could take a while. So I started the reading week with The Temple of Dawn by Yukio Mishima, translated from the Japanese by Dale E. Saunders and Cecilia Segawa Seigle. The Temple of Dawn is the 3rd in the Sea of Fertility tetralogy, a series of 4 novels that some consider to be Yukio Mishima's magnum opus, and certainly his last major work. The Temple of Dawn follows the main recurring character in the 4 novels, Shigekune Honda, who in this novel, which spans between the years 1941 and 1952 or 1953. So the novel begins in 1941 Bangkok, where Honda has been hired by a Japanese company in an international business dispute with a Thai company. While in Bangkok, Honda hears of a Thai princess who claims to be the reincarnation of a Japanese boy. And Honda comes to believe that this princess is the reincarnation both of his dear friend Kiyoaki Matsuge, who died in 1914, and is the protagonist of Spring Snow, the first in the Sea of Fertility tetralogy, and subsequently of Iseo Ienuma, the main protagonist of Runaway Horses. So Honda gains an audience with the princess and does determine that she seems to be the reincarnation. He then goes to India for a vacation after a successful conclusion to the dispute between his employer and the Thai company. And then he returns to Thailand briefly before returning to Japan shortly before World War II breaks out in the Pacific, or the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor and the declaration of war between the U.S. and Japan. Over the course of World War II, Honda spends most of his time researching various theories of reincarnation, and then the novel picks back up in the early 1950s after the end of the American occupation of Japan. At this point, the princess has come to Japan to study. Her father, as luck would have it, was one of the 2 Thai princes who came to Japan in 1913, 1914, and stayed with Kiyoaki and befriended him. So at this point, 12 years later, the princess doesn't really remember having claimed to be a Japanese boy. But because of the connection between Honda and the prince, and also, I guess, the Honda's time in Thailand 12 years previously, he is asked to look after the princess. Unfortunately for everybody involved, Honda in his late 50s has become a creep. He has become a voyeur, and his obsession for most of the novel is to see the princess with no clothes, naked. And he goes through a lot of really despicable activities to accomplish that. And that makes this novel, I don't know what to make of it. It's certainly the weakest of the three. And it's the 1950s part of this novel is rather soiling. It's like seeing Honda in the first two novels is a fairly good character. I mean, he has his faults, but he's not a voyeur. He's not a peeping Tom. I mean, and he is. And it's rather soiling reading him spying on his guests, lurking in the bushes, setting the princess up for being raped. It's soiling. And I'm wondering if perhaps maybe it's part of this is maybe a sense on Mishima's part that in the 1950s that is perhaps in some way his reflection on Japan after World War II. I don't know, but I was happy to finish the novel. And I don't think it particularly ends all that well. It really peters out. I think in a lot of ways this novel is sort of there's still some of the brilliance of the earlier two novels, but it's lacking and soiling. So after The Temple of Dawn, I reread The Spell by Alan Hollinghurst. This is Hollinghurst's third novel and is about a group of 4 gay men in the mid-1990s. The first gay man we meet is Robin. And this first chapter is set in the early 1970s when he is in Arizona or New Mexico doing research on Frank Lloyd Wright. Well, Robin is an architect who's studying for an advanced degree. And while he's at a gay bar cruising, he learns that his girlfriend is pregnant with his child. When the novel picks back up in the second chapter in the early 1990s, Robin is in his later 40s. He hasn't quite fulfilled his early promise, but he's still something of a silver fox with an aristocraticness to him. Robin is in a relationship with a younger man named Justin, who's in his early mid-30s. He's, I think, 34. He was an aspiring actor, but has come to live off of both his inheritance from his father, as well as his lovers. Justin is disloyal, impish, a year previously, Justin was the lover of Alex, who is slightly older at 36. He works in the Foreign Office and is uptight and very rigid in a lot of ways. He falls in love easily and passionately. And the fourth main character is Robin's son, Danny, who is 22 and 23 and over the course of the novel. Danny, in a way, you could make the argument that he hasn't quite found his way in the world. He hasn't found a career. He's very much going from job to job. He never sticks in one for too long. And he is also very promiscuous. And he's a very interesting character. So the main thrust of the novel is that to stir up trouble, Justin invites Alex down to Robin and his country cottage for a weekend, so that Alex and Robin can fight over him while he lusts after Danny. And what happens is that over the course of this novel, all four men change and come out the end slightly different than they were. Of the four, the most extreme change is Alex, who begins a relationship with Danny. And this relationship is sort of the traditional kind of gay coming-of-age relationship in reverse. In this case, Danny introduces Alex to the contemporary gay scene, the club scene, and also recreational drug use. And this sort of loosens up Alex, even as perhaps some of Alex's, like his deep, easy, passionate love is still present. But the Alex at the end of the novel is much more relaxed than Alex at the beginning. And then Robin and Justin's relationship is renegotiated over the course of the novel. I'm not entirely sure how exactly Danny changes. I don't think he changes all that much, if at all. And I'm not entirely sure if Hollinghurst quite knew what to do with him, in a way. And I think, in a way, I've been torn about this novel for a very long time. So, The Spell is the first novel of Alan Hollinghurst that I ever owned, back in the very early 2000s. Although it took me about 2003, 2004 before I finally read it. Because I bought it in, I think, like late 2000, early 2001, or sometime in 2001. And I tried to read it, and I didn't quite get past the first chapter. And then it took me a few years, about 2003, 2004, before I successfully read it. And then there was a very long at least 21, 22 year period where I had not reread this novel. Even though there was a time a few years ago where I wanted to read all of Hollinghurst, and it didn't work out. But this year I'm having a bit more success with Hollinghurst, although whether or not that's going to continue might be a subject for later in this video. Anyway, so one thing I noticed in both, from what I can remember of my original read and this reread, is that I'm not entirely sure, again, about Hollinghurst's handling of Danny. Certainly when I first read the novel, Danny was the character that I identified with because I was myself around Danny's age. A little bit younger, but I mean, he was the one that I most gravitated towards. And felt at the time that he didn't quite get the attention he needed or the transformation. And I think I still stand by that assessment 20 odd years later. Even though now, obviously, I think in some ways, while my personality is probably closer, is a mix of Alex and Danny, but that's not really important. Anyway, but I think on this reread, I'm kind of wondering if maybe, well, I do think this is Hollinghurst's weakest so far. I don't think it's a slump of a novel, but it's certainly weaker than The Swimming Pool Library and The Spell. And I think perhaps maybe the problem is that this is an ensemble novel in only 257 pages. So I don't think it's... I think perhaps the novel should have been a bit longer, or significantly longer, or maybe Hollinghurst should have stuck with his technique previously, which was to focus on one character and have them in a sort of a first-person narrative. But anyway, so on the one hand, I did enjoy my reread. I did very much enjoy rereading this novel and finally having reread it. But there is still something off about it. There's still something that I'm not sure about. Although I had thought, going back to reading stuff that I've read decades ago, that I usually don't have similar reactions to. And this time I was still... Yeah, so anyway. So that was The Spell. So now on to The Veil, which is We Are Green and Trembling by Gabriela Cabezon Camara, translated from the Spanish by Robin Myers. So this is a novel, a historical novel, set in the early mid-17th century. It is about Antonio, who is a historical figure. We would describe him, and Camara treats him, or Cabezon Camara treats him as a trans man. Antonio, when he was 4, was sent to a convent that his aunt ran as a prioress, with the intention of teaching her and encouraging her to become a nun. However, at 15, Catalina, as Antonio was then known as, fled the convent and proceeded to travel about Spain as a young boy, or as a teenage boy, and then eventually going to the New World and having various careers there. So the novel itself is, at least to the point where I bailed, divided into 2 sections: the odd chapters and the even chapters. The odd chapters are about Antonio trying to write a letter to his aunt, telling her of his adventures after he fled the convent, as well as while fleeing into the jungle with 2 Guarani girls, Mitokunya and Michi, that he rescued. The even chapters tell the story of what happened before Antonio fled into the jungle, where he was imprisoned and about to be executed for something, and was saved from execution by the captain needing a new secretary, and sort of bonding with Antonio because of their shared Basque heritage. In the aftermath of some weird event that also saw the local bishop dying and weird circumstances. So I never connected with this novel. It just, as I read it and tried to find a way to connect to it, it never worked out. And I'm not in. And I guess maybe part of the problem is that how Cabezon Camara does the novel, it's there isn't really much of a plot yet. And so the main thrust of the novel is in some ways an attempt at character development and also a whimsical literary style that I honestly found off-putting. The captain and the bishop are both rather monstrous figures, but they are treated in a very sort of whimsical, mocking way that I don't think quite works. And a lot of the style I did not connect with. And I'm not entirely sure the preference for approaching the novel this way rather than a more linear narrative. So I did not care for this, and I ultimately bailed on it. So on to what I will be reading this coming reading week. So today I'm going to read The Children's Hour by Lillian Hellman for Angelia Read and Rereads Endless Drama Project. I will be reading the play from this anthology, Forbidden Acts, edited by Ben Hodges. And then I will, on Saturday, read or reread The Women by Clare Boothe Luce from this anthology, Plays by American Women, 1930 to 1960, edited by Judith E. Barlow. It's been a long time since I read that play. And then once I finish with that, I think I will be moving on to The Safekeep by Yael van der Wouden. And so I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about what I want to do and try to winnow down what I will be reading the last few days of March as well in this video. So, after The Safekeep, I think I would like to try to get to Taiwan Travelogue by Shuang-Zi, translated from the Mandarin by Lin King. Like with B.O. Green and Trembling, Taiwan Travelogue is a previous winner of the National Book Award in Translated Literature, as well as longlisted for this year's Booker International Prize. Two other books that I have put on my March reading plan is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, which would be a reread. There's two booktube events for which this novel... No, there's one booktube event for which this novel would work, and that is March on the Moors, which is dedicated to the Brontes. And then there is Murder on the Orient Express by Agatha Christie, which would work for March Mystery Madness as well as March on the Rails. So I don't think I'm going to have enough time to get to all three of them in the time that is left. So, of the three, I think I'm going to try to get to Murder on the Orient Express before March is out, because this is March Mystery Madness and March on the Rails. So And there's no other booktube event that could inspire me to go to read it again later in the year. So for Jane Eyre, there is Victober that I could reread this novel for. And then for Taiwan Travelogue, there is May and June and August and even September that I could probably push this back to, even though I kind of want to get to it now. So I don't quite know how I'm going to do this. I will, of course, report back next week on what I decide to do. So, what else is there before I wrap this up? So, as I mentioned in my the latest episode of the 2026 library tour, there is still 2 more weeks of history left to do. Next week I will finish off this bookcase here, as well as the 2 end shelves, groups of shelves on this bookcase behind me. And then the next week I will get to the middle shelves. And then after that, I will get to the fiction, poetry, and drama part of my library when I need to figure out how I'm going to film it. And also what I'm going to do about whatever new books come in. Because by the point in time I get to this part, the March book haul will be put in onto the shelves. Excuse me. But I don't know about any possible April book haul that could be forthcoming. Speaking of book hauls, I did go ahead yesterday and put in my pre-order for the April manga. So what I do is every month I put in a pre-order for the following month's forthcoming volumes of manga in the series I actively follow and would like to try out from Book People. And then they will collect the volumes as they come in. Then once the last volumes of the shipment or the order comes in, they will ship all of them to me. And I will usually get that pre-order the first or second week of the following month. So I went ahead and put in my pre-order or pre-orders because I made a screw up and forgot 2 volumes of manga. So I actually have 2 pre-orders with Book People. Although I did email them, and hopefully they will bundle the 2 orders together instead of sending them separately. And it's going to be big. So my March manga haul is going to be small. It's only going to be 4 volumes. And April is going to be massive. There is no way in heck I'm going to be able to read all of those volumes of manga in a day. So it's basically going to be a weekend dedicated to manga. So that's going to influence, I think, on what I read in May. But I'll get to that when I get to it. As far as BookTube events, or like next week in BookTube, I would like to do some tag videos. There is one that I'm not entirely sure if I'm going to do or not, because it's one of those that are a bit more personal BookTube tags, and I'm not always comfortable doing them because I'm not. But I might try it and see how it works out anyway. And then I would like to do 1 or 2 discussion videos if I can ever get those to work out for me. But anyway, I'm starting to ramble and it's almost 30 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up, and I will see you next week. So until then, BookTube, thank you. Have a great rest of your afternoon and have a great weekend.